Hello guys and welcome again to my channel. So today we are going to have an independent episode. So that means you can have this video lecture even if you have not seen the previous episodes in this current series. So our lesson for this video is related to the question how to classify the assets and liabilities as current or non-current. But before we start, please click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be updated on my next videos. But if you did that already, then let's get started. So, how to classify assets and liabilities? So, in your basic accounting days, you have always been taught that assets and liabilities can be classified into current and non-current. And you've always been taught that as to assets, you should classify them as current if those assets can be converted to cash within 1 year or less, or used within 1 year or less from the balance sheet date or from the current year end. And as to liabilities, you are taught that these liabilities are considered current if those liabilities are settled within 1 year or less from the balance sheet date. Well, that's true guys, but I'll tell you this. So these two guides here are only applicable to assets or liabilities that are not related in the normal operations of your business entity. So we call them non-operating assets and non-operating liabilities. So first question, what are the examples of these? So examples are, for assets, we have loans receivable. But you need to make sure that extending loans is not one of the normal business operations of your entity. Meaning, you should not be a bank or a financing company that offers credit to clients. Okay? And as for liabilities, we have loans or notes payable in which that borrowing should not be related to your day-to-day operations or day-to-day operations of your entity. Example, it can be a loan you availed for you to expand or construct a building for the company. Okay? So, those are the examples. Now, next question. What if the assets or liabilities are related to operations? So, what will happen to the classification? Answer, of course guys, we still need to apply these two. But there is already an additional phrase, which is or operating cycle, whichever is longer. Meaning, if the assets are related to operations, then you classify it as current if those assets can be converted into cash within 1 year or less or used within 1 year or less from the balance sheet date or operating cycle, whichever is longer. So, the 1 year will now be versus the operating cycle. Okay? And on the liabilities related to operations, we can classify them as current if those liabilities are settled within 1 year or less from the balance sheet date or operating cycle, whichever is longer. Okay? So, that's what will happen to the classification. Now, there are two things that I will present to you before we apply these two right here plus this phrase. Okay? So the first one is, what are the examples of these assets and liabilities related to operations? And the second one is, what is this operating cycle? Okay? So let's start with the examples. Let's have the previous slide here first. Okay? So what are the examples of assets related to operations? So examples are receivables from customers. And we also have inventories. So no question about these two because they are very much related to operations of an entity, right? Now, another is we have marketable securities, which are bonds or shares of stock of other companies bought by your company as part of its normal operations. For example, if your company is an investment company which trades or buy and sell shares, bonds, cryptocurrency, and etc. So if your company is like that, your company will probably buy those securities at lower cost. But by the time the market price becomes higher, the company will sell it. So if your company is like that, then those securities are considered marketable securities. And those marketable securities are assets related to operations. Okay? So we have another examples right here, which are the supplies and the prepayments, like prepaid rent or prepaid insurance. So those are the examples of assets related to operations. Now, how about liabilities related to operations? So we have here examples like accounts payable to suppliers, unearned revenues due to cash advances given by customers. We have salaries payable of your workers, or taxes payable. So, those are the examples of liabilities related to operations. So, these here are all the examples of assets and liabilities related to operations. Okay? I hope the distinction between these here, the assets and liabilities not related to operations, and these here are clearer for you. So, up next, we will answer the question, what is the operating cycle? So, stay tuned. So, what is an operating cycle? Answer, it is a time period in which it starts from the moment you have cash and you use the cash to purchase inventory if you are a merchandising entity, and raw materials if you are a manufacturing entity. It also covers the conversion of such raw materials to finished products. And it also covers the period of selling those products, and it also covers the time period of collection of cash from selling those products. And since you already have cash, then the cycle starts again. You buy again raw materials or inventories and convert it. Okay? And so on. So, to be clearer, let's assume that you are Baby G and you are a maker of wine. And your time periods for production and selling are as follows. So, to start, we have the extraction and the storage in wood barrels, plus the bottling and the packaging, plus the temporary storage to a warehouse before they are sold to customers, needs about 20 months in time period. So, that's the first one. But after 20 months, the second one is that you need to sell them. And the collection of cash from those sales takes about 4 months. Okay? Now, we can say that it takes 24 months for BBG company to start producing again. Okay? So that 24 months is what do we call the operating cycle. Okay? Now, it's time to apply the concept that liabilities and assets related to operations are classified as current if they are to be settled or converted into cash within 1 year or operating cycle, whichever is longer. Okay? So, if for example, Baby G here in this example purchased all the raw materials on account for 2 million, and that is payable or that is scheduled to be payable or to be settled in 1.5 years. So, the question is, what is the classification of Baby G's debt? Current or non-current? Answer, we have current. Because, number one, the liability is directly related to the operations of Baby G. And number two, such liability is payable within 1 year or operating cycle, whichever is longer. And as you can see here, we have 24 months as the operating cycle, which is longer than 1 year. And the 1.5 years maturity term is covered by these 24 months. So again, the classification of this debt is current. So the same is true if the company has a receivable from a customer. So you classify it as a current asset if it is collectible within the operating cycle, provided again that the operating cycle is longer than 1 year. Okay? Now, I know it's already clear, but let's make it clearer by having the conclusion. Okay? So, in conclusion, if an asset can be used or converted into cash within 1 year or less, or if a liability is scheduled to be settled within 1 year or less, you can classify them immediately as current without the need of asking if those accounts are related to operations or not. But if an asset is long-term in nature, you need to ask first if that is a receivable or a physical asset, like property, plant, and equipment to be used by the company. Because if it is a property, plant, and equipment, or land, building, and machinery used by the company, I'll emphasize again, PPE, if it is a PPE used by the company, then classify it immediately as non-current. Okay? But if it is a receivable or any investment which can be converted into cash, then ask about whether the account is related to operations. Okay? So if it is not related to operations, then go back to here. Okay? So it's as easy as that. But if it is related to operations, then ask about the operating cycle of the entity and see if it's longer than 1 year. Because if not, if the operating cycle is not longer than 1 year, then go back to this rule here. But if it is longer than 1 year, then compare it with the maturity term for the receivable or investment account that is considered. Okay? And then, classify it as current if it is collectible or convertible to cash within the operating cycle, which should again be longer than 1 year. So the operating cycle should be longer than 1 year. You need to remember that. Now, if we are talking about long-term liabilities, which the maturity term is more than a year, then ask about if it is related to operations or not. Because if it is related to operations, you need to ask again about the operating cycle of the entity and see if it is longer than 1 year. And if it is longer than 1 year, then compare it with the maturity term of your liability. And then classify it as current if payable is to be settled within the operating cycle, which should again be longer than 1 year. So again, the operating cycle should be longer than 1 year. So all other else that can't be classified as current, you classify them as non-current. Okay? Lastly, there's a twist that you need to know, which is if the receivable or payable is in installments, the balance will be split into current and non-current portions. Let me repeat that. If the receivable or payable is in installments, you need to remember that they will be split into current and non-current portions. Okay? So, those installments payable within 1 year for accounts not related to operations or within 1 year or operating cycle, whichever is longer, for accounts related to operations must be classified as current. And they should be presented in the current liabilities section of the financial statements. Okay? So, all other installments that do not qualify as current shall be presented in the non-current section of the financial statements. So, that's it for this video. And I hope you learned. And if you did, then please click like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and select all to be updated on my next videos. So again, thank you for watching and see you on the next one.